The number one rule of feedback is that people respond better to feedback which is specific. Imagine, for example, if you made a presentation at work and your boss told you that the presentation was boring, which is a form of generic feedback. Most probably, you would react defensively. You will think that the presentation is boring means you are boring, and therefore maybe you will get angry. Or maybe you will think that your boss didn't understand what the presentation was about. Either way, you would not be listening at what the feedback means. Conversely, imagine that your boss gave you a very specific piece of feedback. For example, that there was too much text on your slides. You are much less likely to take that piece of feedback personally because it's not about you anymore. It's about your slides. And it's not about your slides in general. It's just about one tiny thing, which is that there was too much text on your slides. Therefore, you're much more likely to accept that feedback and do something about it. Particularly because generic feedback is not very actionable. If your boss just tells you it's boring, and maybe you decide, even if it feels very personal, you decide to accept that piece of feedback, you still don't know what to do about it. Maybe you knew that your presentation was boring, simply you weren't able to do a presentation which is interesting. So generic feedback is not actionable. Conversely, if your boss tells you that there is too much text on your slides, you immediately know what to do next, to remove some of the text on your slides. Therefore, specific feedback is much more actionable. I could keep talking about feedback for hours, but the real number one thing, the one thing that brings the most result if you implement it, is just to make your feedback more specific. Every time that you will give some feedback to some of your employees, never give feedback about the whole thing. Instead, try to go very specific on the most important detail. I give you another example. Sometimes I hear people employees that go to their manager asking, "How's my presentation?" And then the manager says, "Oh, I like it." Even if this feedback is positive, again, it doesn't really tell anything. Maybe the employee is even left wondering, did my boss even listen to my presentation? Conversely, imagine if the boss replied with, "Oh, I really like the slide in which you put that one chart which was extremely precise and passed your point very well to the audience." That's very specific feedback. It's great because first, it gives the impression that you were really listening. Second, it's great because it reinforces a very specific behavior and makes it more likely that the employee will do it in the future. So also for positive feedback, be very specific. And then just try to neglect usual advice about feedback, like I've been told over and over to use a sandwiching when giving feedback. Sandwiching means you tell the other people one good thing, one bad thing, and one good thing. In theory, it makes sense. You're saying, oh, you're not just telling people bad things so they don't feel too bad about themselves. But in practice, what happens over and over is that the moment you start saying the good thing, people already switch in defensive mode. They already are like, oh, the sandwiching is about to come. The good thing at the beginning doesn't really mean anything. I should brace myself for the bad thing that comes next. Instead, my advice is forget about sandwiching. Just give 2 or 3 specific items of feedback. Don't care about whether it's good or whether it's bad, like it's positive or negative feedback, because if you make it specific enough, it will be well received by the audience, by your recipient anyway. So just to conclude this first mini unit of this 5 days mini course on feedback, make your feedback more specific. So what I would prompt you to do over the next day, today and tomorrow, is first, whenever you're about to give feedback to someone, try to make it more specific. Instead of giving feedback to the wall, or to the employee, pick something that they did. Something that they did well, something that they did badly, doesn't matter, but something specific. And then the second thing I want you to do is just think after you had a conversation with someone, just play back the conversation in your head and think, have I given specific feedback or have I been generic? And if you've been specific, how did they react? And if you've been generic, how did they react? So thank you very much for listening to this first mini unit. Tomorrow you will receive a new mini unit. And just as a reminder, when you give feedback, be more specific. Thank you.